I'm about to enter a massive fantasy football tournament over on Underdog Fantasy, and this isn't your normal fantasy football league because there is nearly 200,000 teams, and every single week of the NFL season, the lowest scoring rosters in this tournament will get kicked out and eliminated until we get to one final team. That team will win $200,000. So as you can tell, I can't draft an average fantasy football team. I have to draft the most perfect fantasy football team possible. And so that's why I have called in nearly 15 fantasy football experts, the best in the business, to come in and help me draft this roster. So let's not waste any time. Let's hop into this tournament and see what pick we're going to be picking from. So the beginning of this draft has started pretty normal for the most part. You have guys like Bijan Robinson, Jamar Chase, Saquon Barkley, Justin Jefferson coming off of the board. For me, really, when I'm here on the clock at the 105 for our first round pick, I'm really between two guys. It's going to be CeeDee Lamb and Jahmyr Gibbs. And I think you could go either way. And based on this league and this specific type of tournament style where every single week, right out of the gates, even in week one, you need the big performance to make sure that you keep advancing each and every week, I think there's an argument for a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs. However, I do think that wide receiver position is also very important. We do need to start three of those guys in this tournament. So I am going to go with CeeDee Lamb. He's a player that I have in my top three wide receivers for fantasy football this year. I think this Cowboys offense is going to improve with a healthier Dak Prescott here. So for me, he is going to be the guy that I think we can pick. Like I said, it was between Jahmyr Gibbs and CeeDee Lamb, but for this selection, I'm going with CeeDee Lamb. All right, so a little bit of time has passed here, and we're going to be back up on the clock here for our second round pick. And as I'm looking at this draft board, we do have a couple of good players still on the board. Obviously, we're just in the second round right now, but A.J. Brown, Brock Bowers feel like really big difference makers that could be on our team here at this moment in time. I think after that, we kind of have a tier break. If you want to put Tyreek Hill in that tier with A.J. Brown, sure. I think there's enough regression possibility here where maybe he's not the best pick for our team, but it doesn't really matter what I think. So let's kick it over to Mason Dodd from Flock Fantasy. He's going to be making the selection here in round two, and let's see who he thinks we need to be putting on this team.
A.J. Brown is an auto pick in the middle of the second round. This is a guy who went in round one last year, the year before, for a solid reason, right? You look at the past 3 seasons with the player comparison tool on flockfantasy.com, and you will see that A.J. Brown, 2.85 yards per route run, compared to Jamar Chase, 2.2. Justin Jefferson, 2.77. CeeDee Lamb, 2.71. You're looking at a 30.8% target share for A.J. Brown in the games that he's played in over the past 3 years, which, yes, is ahead of all the other elite level wide receivers. Now, of course, we did see a step backwards this past season. The main reason being is the Philadelphia Eagles just didn't throw the ball. 448 pass attempts, which was 20 fewer than the next worst offense in the league. But if we look at the underlying numbers for A.J. Brown, it's not like he was any worse. 3.16 yards per route run last year, 34.5% team target share. So realistically, we saw A.J. Brown's absolute floor last season as the wide receiver 13 in a year where the Eagles did not throw the ball whatsoever. Now, if anything changes this season, where maybe the Philadelphia Eagles aren't by far and away the best team in the NFL and they just boat race every opponent they go up against, maybe the defense is a little bit worse, maybe Barkley misses some time, and maybe they just don't want to have to lean on Barkley as much. The passing volume only has one direction to go, and that is upwards. It's not like A.J. Brown's the age where we should be expecting a natural decline. And if we just look at the tools on the site, we will see that there's been no fall off whatsoever from a talent perspective. So A.J. Brown in the middle of the second round, it just has to be an auto pick here for this draft.
All right, so A.J. Brown is the pick. That's a good pick. It's probably the selection that I would have made. That's going to give us a strong selection here at wide receiver where we're going to be looking at CeeDee Lamb and A.J. Brown as those top 2 wide receivers. You have a lot of options there at this point in time where we kind of have that strong foundation for the wide receiver room. So I think there's going to be some really good options here on the board when we get to our third round pick here at the 305. So let's see what happens when we get around that turn, and maybe we can hopefully get a running back on this team, because I do think that there's some good players like Josh Jacobs, Chase Brown, maybe even Kyron Williams or Breece Hall if you want to reach up and grab them to get them on the squad as our RB1. All right, so working our way around this turn so far, you had Bowers come off the board after our A.J. Brown pick, Jacobs, Rice, Tyreek, Chase Brown, Josh Allen, lots of guys really that we're used to kind of seeing going around that turn so far. It does seem like we've gotten just a little bit of value on Garrett Wilson, not too much, but there are some good picks still on the board. If we wanted to go with a running back, we don't have one on the team yet. You could go with Kyren Williams, who I am actually pretty high on this year. A guy like James Cook is still on the board as well. Or if you wanted to maybe go into that tight end, you could go Trey McBride or something like that. So, I don't get to make this selection. Let's kick it over to Nick Ercolano of BDGE and see what he wants us to do here with this third round pick.
With our third round pick, Lamar Jackson was sitting there looking like the easiest draft button pick of all time. So we took our quarterback, our QB1, Lamar Jackson, coming off a 41-4 touchdown to interception ratio season. They gave him the MVP in 2023, so they felt like they couldn't do it again in 2024. But don't get it twisted. We pretty much have the back-to-back MVP on our team, and gone are the days where we need to be sitting on quarterback, where we need to be waiting on the QB position. The reason that we used to do that is because we didn't have top-tier separators like Josh Allen's and Lamar Jackson's at the top of the drafts, who averaged 5, 6, 7 points per game more than the QB12, the QB15, the QB17. And that's exactly the type of advantage that a Lamar Jackson brings to you. And when I look at them entering 2025, the continuity of the Baltimore Ravens is what makes me so excited. Like, since Todd Monken took over for Greg Roman as the offensive coordinator, this team has rallied around Lamar Jackson as a passer of the football. And with Derrick Henry in the backfield, like, there was no defense that they could play on the other side of the ball that will correctly stop this type of Baltimore Ravens offense. Lamar has flourished into one of the most accurate passers on a football field. And with Todd Monken still there as the offensive coordinator, this team will only get more and more and more refined. So I'm expecting another massive, game-breaking, advantageous type of fantasy season out of Lamar Jackson. Again, draft really good players on really good teams, and you will have a really good fantasy team at the end of the year.
All right, so Lamar Jackson is the selection there. I don't mind it, actually. You know, I haven't been drafting a ton of Lamar Jackson early in these drafts so far, but you cannot deny the fact that Lamar Jackson is a difference maker for fantasy football teams. It's going to be interesting to see how we maneuver that later in this draft. Maybe that means we have somebody go after a guy like Mark Andrews, a Zay Flowers, just to get a little bit of correlation with that Baltimore receiving core, but I don't mind that type of pick. Hey, starting it off with CeeDee Lamb, AJ Brown, and Lamar Jackson, we should be able to get out of the gates hot with this fantasy football team, which is really what we need, knowing that the first week is really when it starts, because you can get eliminated as soon as week 1. But that said, let's get around this turn. Let's see what happens, and let's see what the board looks like once we get to that 4th round pick. All right, so a little time has passed since we made that 3rd round pick there of Lamar Jackson. Couple guys coming off the board that I thought would have been pretty interesting for the team. Devontae Adams is a player that I'm pretty high on this year, a guy like George Kittle. And then we had a little bit of a running back run, which I think is probably, you know, something we really wanted to put onto this roster. A guy like Kyren Williams, I think, would have been a smash pick, but he got selected right before us at pick 43. James Cook is also another player that I think is a little bit undervalued in drafts right now because of some of the stuff going on with the contracts. But we're on the clock here at pick 44. Looking at our team, Lamar Jackson, CeeDee Lamb, AJ Brown, I think it would be really nice for us to try and grab a running back on this roster. It seems like the biggest need, but if we're not going to go running back, and it is going to trend a little bit more towards a 0 running back build, obviously grabbing a wide receiver here, you have some of the correlation with Jameson Williams, as you can see, maybe a player in DJ Moore that we think can take a step forward this year with Ben Johnson. But if we're going to go the running back route, a guy like Alvin Kamara, I think, makes a ton of sense for us, just because we need to get out to a very quick start in this type of format so we don't get eliminated early on. So a guy like Alvin Kamara would be great, but if you want to take a swing for upside, maybe a guy like Kenneth Walker or Omarion Hampton are also in play here. But it's not my selection. I can have the opinion, but at the end of the day, the selection is going to be by Ron Stewart. So let's see what Ron has in store for us here with this 4th round pick.
With our 4th round pick, I am going to be selecting Omarion Hampton. Now, there's a lot of studs on the board here. We passed on Kyren Williams, JSN, James Cook, Jalen Hurts. Well, we already had a quarterback, but I get one pick on this team. I'll be damned if it's not a player that I like a lot. And I love Omarion Hampton, 1st round pick. He has size, speed. He is going to a Chargers offense that wants to run the ball, has a top 10 offensive line, and there's a lot of uncertainty around the Najee Harris situation in terms of the fireworks. I don't want to speculate too much, but Omarion Hampton could be wheels up from day one. Now, I do want to say the reason that this needed to be running back is because I am actually thinking about the format here. This is an eliminator draft, which means every week is its own head-to-head matchup. So you can't draft 0 RB and punt the position off because you got to win week 1 and then you got to win week 2. You can't afford to hope for a Bucky Irving down the stretch or a starter to go down in your handcuff to ascend. You need to score points out the gate. So I am getting a running back here first and foremost. We cannot punt it off any longer. I feel good about the pick. I'm also very curious to see how the rest of this team plays out.
All right, so we do get the position that we needed in the running back, but it does seem like we're going to go with the upside swing with Omarion Hampton. I think this is a player that's going to get better and better over the course of the year. He's a player that can turn into a second half league winner for us. I'm a little bit nervous about how quickly he's going to start out of the gate, especially if Najee Harris is involved. Obviously, there's been some things with Najee Harris over the last month where we don't know how ready he's going to be at the start of the season, but let's see what happens with Omarion Hampton. Maybe we can pair him with some veteran running backs here a little bit later that are going to have better first couple games, so it does give us a little bit of time for Omarion Hampton to get fully involved. But there you go, first running back on our roster, Omarion Hampton. All right, so we are quickly making our way through this draft, almost a third of the way done at this point, looking for our 5th pick here in this draft at the 505. Now, since the Hampton selection, we've had a couple of these running backs come off the board that I like. A guy like Alvin Kamara, specifically, I feel like he really does fit this team build that we have here pretty well. I think right now I'm just a little bit nervous about the running back room. I think we're kind of getting into a tier here where we're quickly going to get out of some of those reliable RB2s. You have guys like Connor and maybe Monty a little bit later that I think can still be reliable, and some guys like Pacheco that I like, but it does feel like we are rapidly seeing these running backs come off the board. And Hampton, as much as I like him, I do think he is a player that is a little bit more a second half player. So I think James Conner is a screaming add to this roster that I think would fit really well. Other than that, though, Zay Flowers is here. You can see he's highlighted. That would be a good type of pick for us because you would get that stack with Lamar Jackson. But there's a good group of wide receivers here. You can't really go wrong. Devontae Smith, George Pickens. The thing is we have Lamb and A.J. Brown on the roster, so do you want to double dip into those offenses? There's lots of things to think about. Even a guy like Jaylen Waddle, if you believe in him and that Miami offense. But to me, I think James Conner is a screaming pick, and he would be my selection here if I could make it. Now, the thing is, it's not me. Let's kick it over to Derek Brown. Derek Brown's going to be making this selection, and let's see what he decides to do.
With our 5th round pick, I'm going with George Pickens. Just looking at the team construction here so far, Lamar Jackson, Omarion Hampton, CeeDee Lamb, and A.J. Brown, I think this is a really good spot to lean into the Dallas passing attack and double stacking possibly Dak Prescott in the later rounds. And really, I'm just high on George Pickens this year. A lot of people have him outside their top 24 wide receivers. I question that a lot, so extremely high on him. And I mean, let's just talk about George Pickens and his skill set and what he brings to the Dallas passing attack and what that could look like in 2025. Arguably, and this is, I say arguably, but honestly, let's just talk about it. Dak Prescott is the best quarterback that George Pickens has ever played with. And I know you'll bring up Ben Roethlisberger or other guys and stuff like that. At that point of his career, this isn't even close, people. So quarterback play, check. You look at the per route metrics. George Pickens last year, 16th in target share, 25th in yards per route run, 9th in first read share, 24th in receiving yards per game. He was flirting with or already producing as a top 24 wide receiver on a number of spots. If you even zoom in further to weeks 1 through 13 before George Pickens picked up a hamstring injury, clearly a top 24 wide receiver. 18th in separation rate, 8th in yards per route run, per fantasy points data. These are wonderful metrics. Now we talk about the situation and going back to Dak Prescott and this passing attack. George Pickens moves from an offense that had the 4th fewest passing attempts last year, he goes to Dallas with Cooper Rush leading the charge last year, finished 3rd in passing attempts. So we have volume, we have talent, and haven't even discussed yet, George Pickens is in a contract year. So outside of all of this, money talks, people. So getting him at this point of the best ball draft as the wide receiver 3 on this team, as a possible double stack option for Dak Prescott, where later, if we'll see how the team fleshes itself out, I'm going to go Lamar Jackson and Rashad Bateman later in a skinny stack and stuff like that. You have the possibility to do that. But double stacking a passing offense that could be top 5, top 10 in passing attempts with 2 extremely talented players, this was a must-have for this team. It's going to help us go all the way to the top.
All right, D-Bro. He decides to go with the wide receiver position, passing on the running back. Like I said, I feel like James Conner was probably a really good pick there just because I know James Conner early on is going to give me a lot of volume and he's going to be a guy we can rely on as our RB2. But he decides to double dip into this Dallas offense, giving us the George Pickens and the CeeDee Lamb type of Dallas receiver stack. Going to be a little bit interesting. I'd love to try and get a Dak Prescott on the team later because then we can have that stack with this offense and really be tied into it. But we have Lamar Jackson. So is somebody going to want to invest in QB, or are we going to want to push that down the road a little bit later where maybe Dak Prescott is a guy that you're going to have to spend one of those middle round picks on? It's going to be interesting. I think Dak would be a good fit for this team now because of that selection, but I'm interested to see how this goes. We need a running back. If it's not going to be, somebody soon, maybe with my next selection, I have to make sure we get a running back because I'm getting pretty nervous about this running back room right now. Moving our way on to the 6th round. We're on the clock here at the 6:08. As you guys can see, we did have, some of those wide receivers come off the board in Zay Flowers, Jaylen Waddle, Devontae Smith that we had just talked about. James Conner comes off the board as well, and even David Montgomery, who I think could have been interesting as a safe running back play. But that said, we're going to be looking here at a most possible players of maybe a Swift, a Pacheco if you wanted him. Wide receiver wise, you got Travis Hunter, Jerry Jeudy, Deebo Samuel, Chris Godwin. I think there's a lot of ways we can go about this one. At this point in time, it feels like we have pushed this running back a little bit too far. I'd love to get some running back production in here, but we're in a weird tier here where you have to have strong conviction in either a Swift or a Pacheco or a Caleb Johnson or even an Aaron Jones. So it's going to come down to what Corey Bushland from Fantasy Stock Exchange thinks about these running backs, or is he going to continue the trend of going to the wide receiver position? But let's see what he decides to do here with this 6th round pick.
All right, with our 6th round pick, we're going to be selecting Travis Hunter here. Pretty straightforward. In the 6th round, there's no way a prospect of Travis Hunter's caliber should be on the board. A lot of ambiguity with, is he going to play offense? Is he going to play defense? I tend to think he's going to play very much on offense. And when you look at his prospect comps, you get JSN, Garrett Wilson, Justin Jefferson, even despite only being a full-time wide receiver his junior year at Colorado and only being a very, very part-time gadget guy before that. I mean, Thomas, Lawrence, Hunter, that's what this offense is going to be. Going to be a very consolidated target share, and I'm taking the value, especially in best ball, man. Like, where are you not drafting Travis Hunter? Maybe it's in managed leagues. Maybe it's in leagues where you got to decide when to start the guy, when to sit the guy. But given his ability to move differently than everybody else, the catch point fundamentals, the route running ability, best ball is the best format for him, especially given the team we've already built out. So I'm taking Travis Hunter here. Feel very, very good about getting him in the 6th round. I would have been willing to take him near that 4-5 turn. So getting him in the 6-9 or 6-8 where we're picking, feel great about that.
All right, so you heard it. He could not pass on the value of Travis Hunter here. Seems like a lot of people are very high on Travis Hunter this year. I'm still iffy. I think right now, if I had to make a selection for this team, I am higher on Pacheco. I would have went with Pacheco. Would love to try and get some running back production in here, but the good news is with the next selection, it is back to me. So if there is a good running back on the board, I can force a running back pick if need be, try and get us back on track in that running back room. But we have a loaded wide receiver room here, especially after Corey selected Travis Hunter. All right, moving on here to the 7th round. We've worked our way over to our draft pick here at the 7:05. Like I said, I am going to be able to make the selection here. So, we've been kind of punting the running back position. It's made me a little bit nervous. Now we can address that if we would like. We did have Swift and Pacheco and Caleb Johnson come off the board at the running back position. So those guys are not going to be available for us at this pick, but it does leave me here looking at a running back room where you could go with Aaron Jones for the Minnesota Vikings or Brian Robinson Jr. for the Washington Commanders. There's some other guys as well, but I think these two are probably safer bets for this format, for this type of roster where we need some early production here in week 1. I'm looking at both of these guys and we do have some correlation. Obviously Washington, they're in week 17 with the Cowboys that we have on the roster. Same thing, Aaron Jones, week 15 for those Cowboys as well. So I'm between the two. I think if I have to make a selection on the clock here, I am going to go with Brian Robinson. It is a week 12 bye. It doesn't really matter for me. I just think that both offenses are good offenses. They're probably going to start out hot. I do think that the addition of Jordan Mason here in Minnesota is going to take some of the goal line work, where Brian Robinson has that goal line work under control there for the Washington Commanders. So if we're projecting touchdowns, I think that's Brian Robinson's side. Obviously some PPR points, some pass catching work probably for Aaron Jones. But right now, I'm trying to grab some touchdowns early on in the season, hopefully for the Washington Commanders as they are getting into the red zone, into the end zone there, and that will give us some time to have Hampton get a little bit more involved in the offense. But with the recent Najee Harris news and things like that, like, could there be a chance Hampton's ready week 1? Absolutely, but still, sometimes the rookies take a little bit of time, and I think Brian Robinson Jr. gives us a guy here where we can kind of get some early season production to help us maybe supplement that later breakout from Omarion Hampton. But we got the running back out of the way. I was able to step in, get a pick there. That was still part of the plan. It is now out of my hands again for a long period of time. So we will see what happens when we get into the 8th round and see what selection they make when they get on the clock. On the clock here with our 8th round pick, let's just give a quick recap of the team so far. Quarterback position, we got Lamar Jackson. Running backs, Omarion Hampton, Brian Robinson Jr. And then the wide receiver position, we got CeeDee Lamb, AJ Brown, George Pickens, and Travis Hunter. So we're on the clock here. Probably could go anywhere. We did add that running back in Brian Robinson last round. Maybe you could argue that we could take another guy like that, or you take best player available here. That's probably the best case scenario right now, is to just go BPA. If we're going to be going any specific direction that I would probably take, probably the best running back on the board for me would be Quinshon Judkins or Travis Etienne. At wide receiver, I would probably be looking at maybe a Michael Pittman Jr., but I don't really love that pick either. Tight end, TJ Hawkinson's my best player available. So those are kind of the picks that I would be looking at. Maybe Etienne, Judkins, or Hawkinson. I know Judkins is dealing with some of that stuff at the moment, so he's a little bit of a riskier pick, but it is not my selection. Let's see what Ray GQ from Destination Devi wants to do with this selection. All right, Tyrone Tracy Jr. is the selection for Ray. I don't mind adding another running back to this room. This is probably one of the weaker positions that we have so far. Still early on in the draft, so we can fix that. It's not really a big issue, but Tyrone Tracy is the selection. I like this. I think he should get off to a good start as Scatabo kind of gets worked into the offense. Gives us some minor correlation with B-Rob there in week 15 against the Giants. So, not a bad pick at all. I don't mind it at all. A PPR back who can catch some passes and should give us some scoring opportunities early on in the season to hit our lineup in this type of format. Working our way down this draft board, we've seen a couple of the running backs come off the board, like Etienne and Quinshon Judkins. We've also seen some wide receivers in Michael Pittman and Cooper Kupp. The tight end position is probably something that's going to start coming off of the board now. We've seen Hawkinson and Kelsey and those guys come off the board. So if we were to go in that position, you would be looking at like Ingram, Mark Andrews, David Njoku. I wouldn't mind a Mark Andrews just to get us that Baltimore stack, kind of like I talked about earlier in the video. I feel like that would be a good opportunity to maybe land that on our team. His ADP is 114, so maybe we can get that a little bit later. Not really sure about that. But if we had any other positions, I think we are pretty open here. We can go running back or wide receiver. Maybe not going quarterback yet. I think we could wait a little bit later unless we wanted to do the Dak Prescott pick where we could get that CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens type of correlation there with the Dallas Cowboys. So let's see what happens with this selection. I'm kicking it over to Zach from Fantasyland and Dynastyland. So let's see what he has in store for this selection.
All right, with our 9th round pick, we are selecting the Jayden Higgins, Iowa State. Now, top 35 pick in the NFL draft this year. We've seen some bust round 2 wide receivers, but also some hits. Remember, last year, top 35, we had Ladd McConkey, who broke out. In 2022, Christian Watson did his thing, almost 10 touchdowns with Aaron Rodgers. We had T. Higgins, Michael Pittman in 2020, Deebo Samuel in 2019. We're trying to hit on the next great round 2 wide receiver breakout. And the good thing for Jayden Higgins, he's stepping into an offense that desperately needs him. I mean, you look at the Houston Texans, they're top 10 in vacated targets to the wide receiver heading into the season, but these vacated target tools don't include the context of Tank Dell's injury. And if you think about it, Tank Dell, his 81 targets from 14 games last year, those are going to be vacated because he's not going to play the entire season. So in reality, the Texans actually have the 3rd most targets available heading into the season at 175. And if you look at that depth chart, I mean, no Stephon Diggs, he gone. You look at Tank Dell, I hope the brother's going to come back and play at some point, but we got to beat out Christian Kirk, the ghost of Christian Kirk, John Mechie, all right? So ultimately, we're talking about a guy that was the #1 graded PFF receiver last year, if you look at minimum 50 targets, a guy who had 1,100 receiving yards, 7th most in the nation, 9 receiving touchdowns. He can play inside. He can play outside. He complements Nico Collins well. and they desperately need someone outside of Nico to step up. I think he can be the next great person. And if we're going to quote San Antonio Spurs general manager R.C. Buford or the ever so mighty and powerful Sam Presti, broke money don't make none. We're shooting for the stars here.
All right, so Jayden Higgins is the selection. I don't mind it, getting us another wide receiver. Like I said, that pick was pretty open. It keeps us fairly young. We'll see what Higgins does. You know, one of those guys that got that guaranteed contract early on, so he hasn't been holding out like the rest of these second-round picks. So maybe he's motivated to come in and get this thing started off quickly for the Houston Texans, and they should be passing the football a lot this year. It'll just be determined to see how good that offensive line is. But I don't hate the pick there for Jayden Higgins. That was our selection. All right, so we're officially in the double-digit rounds now. After our pick there at the 9-5 where we selected Jayden Higgins, we had a little bit of a quarterback run. Bo Nix came off the board, Drake May, Caleb Williams. But that's okay because we do have that elite quarterback that we're leaning on thanks to Nick's selection there from BDGE. He took Lamar Jackson. Now, I will mention the pick right before us, we did have Dak Prescott come off the board, which is a little bit unfortunate because, you know, we have the CeeDee Lamb and the George Pickens selections there on this team. Probably would have been nice to get that triple Dallas option there where we kind of had the two receivers and the quarterback stack. So that was definitely something that I was looking forward to. However, now that we're on the clock here at the 10-8, I'm looking at the board. We have a potential to go get some of these Ravens stacks with Mark Andrews, or if you want to go to the wide receiver position and go Rashad Bateman, you could do that. If we wanted to maybe select another tight end now that wasn't Mark Andrews, you could go David Njoku, or maybe you want to kind of just wait a little bit longer, maybe one more round and go get a guy like Tucker Kraft or Jake Ferguson. I feel like Ferguson maybe actually puts us a little bit too heavy in that Dallas offense, but there's a couple options there. Not really in love with the running backs on the board at this point in time, even though we have just 3 on the team. We do probably need to tack on a couple more of these guys as this draft gets a little bit closer towards the end. But yeah, I think there's a couple options we could go. That Mark Andrews pick and the Dak pick probably made the most sense just because of the correlation. We can throw Bateman in that sentiment as well. But as you guys know, this is not going to be my selection, so let's kick it over to see who we're going to be drafting here at the 10-8.
With our 10th round pick, I'm going to be selecting Mark Andrews, the tight end for the Baltimore Ravens. Dak Prescott going the pick before us was a brutal beat, but we were still able to get a highly correlated, high-value pick here, linking Lamar Jackson, a top 3 quarterback, up with his elite tight end. There are a lot of biases that bleed into fantasy football analysis, and one that I really like to take advantage of is week 1 bias. And last year in week 1, Isaiah Likely had 11 targets for 9 receptions, 111 yards, and a touchdown. And in that game, Mark Andrews was a complete afterthought. People were quick to announce the changing of the guard, anointing Isaiah Likely as the tight end one to own in Baltimore. And in that game, make no doubt about it, Mark Andrews was absolutely an afterthought. But there's even more bias to take advantage of regarding Mark Andrews this year. We all remember that drop 2-point conversion at the end of the season that ended the Ravens' playoff run. So what we've got is a week 1 struggle and a late season drop, bookending what was otherwise a pretty good season from Mark Andrews. Let's just look at the facts. From week 1 on, order was restored in Baltimore. Isaiah Likely was the tight end 24, while Mark Andrews was the tight end 5. As a matter of fact, Mark Andrews has been a top 5 tight end in each of the last 6 seasons, and I'm willing to bet that he extends that to 7 years after this one. Andrews got off to a slow start last year after a preseason car accident, but after he got ramped up, he was the guy he's been for the last 6 seasons, which is an integral part of a high-scoring offense. At a premium position and getting correlated with a good quarterback, this was an easy selection to make in round 10.
All right, so you love to see it. Dave sees the correlation as well for Mark Andrews being the selection here with our Baltimore Ravens Lamar Jackson stack. So we are going to select Mark Andrews. I have no complaints about that. We needed a tight end on this roster. You have the correlation with Lamar Jackson. I think it's the perfect pick. It makes the most sense. Obviously, we would have liked to see Dak go there, but no complaints there from Dave. You did us a good job last year by selecting T. Higgins, and I think you did us a good job here this year taking Mark Andrews. All right, working our way around the shorter of the 2 turns. We had quite the QB run here with Herbert, Love, Goff, and McCarthy all coming off of the board. I have very high hopes for McCarthy this year, and I think all of these quarterbacks are going to flirt with those low-end QB1 numbers on a week-by-week basis. Maybe have some weeks where they all hit as high-end QB2s, but it might have been a nice spot to potentially get our second quarterback there in that range. But I don't know what we could do here. I guess there's a couple positions like maybe go get our second tight end. Maybe you just go right back to the running back. Well, do you like Javonte Williams as potentially the running back to own there in Dallas? Do you like Rashad White as a guy that can maybe get some touches even if he's not going to be the bona fide starter? But we're kind of reaching the territory of the draft here where you have to take your shot on some of these players and you have to make sure that you have some conviction in them. So let's see what Danny from Fantasy Stock Exchange decides to do with this pick, because he's going to be the one making the selection here.
With the 11th round, 125th overall pick, we will be selecting David Njoku, tight end of the Cleveland Browns. David Njoku, a guy who was a top 4 tight end in points per game last year, who's crossed over a 20% target share in each of the last 2 years. Being available in the 120s just absolutely makes no sense to me. For example, I mean, Travis Kelce's the tight end 6 off the board. I would rather have David Njoku straight up than Travis Kelce this year. On top of that, when we're looking at the current construct of the team, you're set at quarterback. Obviously, when you take Lamar Jackson early, don't need to add another one earlier at this point in the draft. Wide receiver, of course, CeeDee Lamb, A.J. Brown, George Pickens, Travis Hunter, Jayden Higgins. Pretty much a perfect core that you can have up to the 12th round at this point. Really, this decision came down to maybe adding another back to this backfield or potentially closing off this tight end build at 2. We got Mark Andrews to pair with the Lamar Jackson. I think in the weeks that maybe he doesn't score a touchdown, you have a guy in David Njoku who has spike weeks of his own. So again, appreciate you, Andrew, for including me in this video. Hopefully this team can go all the way, and who knows, if we end up taking down the contest, we can all say that we were a piece of history.
All right, so back-to-back tight end picks. I don't mind it at all. It actually gives us the ability here to kind of stop focusing on the tight end position for the rest of the draft. I think we're more than comfortable going with Mark Andrews as that tight end 1 and David Njoku as that tight end 2. And each and every week, one of these guys has the ability to hit our lineup. So I definitely like the ability of drafting the tight end there. And now we can kind of focus on filling out the rest of the roster at the running back, the wide receiver position, and then obviously adding another quarterback here sometime soon as well. All right, so for whatever reason, I lost the footage for round 12. So this is me coming back at the end to just redo that round 12 commentary. The good news was I was on the clock anyway, so there's nothing really to lose that I can't fix. You can see after that 11th round pick where we took David Njoku, we did have a little bit of a run there where Trevor Lawrence, Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, and those guys all came off of the board. I did mention, that I wanted to potentially get a quarterback on the roster, so I ended up selecting Michael Penix with our pick. Now, there is no correlation on this roster where Penix is really going to add anything as far as correlated value goes, but the quarterbacks on the board at the time, either none of them also had correlation. So either way, we were making an uncorrelated quarterback pick. I just decided to go with Penix, who I do think can have a little bit of a step forward here in year 2. Obviously, you're tied to a good offense that has Bijan Robinson, Drake London, hopefully Kyle Pitts, Darnell Mooney. All of these things considered, it does feel like Michael Penix was likely the best quarterback on the board that could take a step forward here in year 2. And there really wasn't that many quarterbacks left here on the board, so I wanted to make sure that we locked in that QB2 before the end of this draft, because I don't really want to rely on somebody else to have to make that quarterback selection. If they didn't have to, they can keep picking running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, all that good stuff if they want to. I'll just lock in our QB2 and we'll rely on Lamar Jackson pretty much 99% of the time outside of that week 7 bye week. All right, so we find ourselves on the clock here again at the 13-5. Really trying to wrap up and put the bow on top of this team. I think right now with our last round pick where we went Michael Penix and then obviously adding the second tight end in David Njoku, we should be done with both the quarterback and the tight end position. So I really do think that the last couple rounds here of this draft, we should be focusing on adding some running back depth that has some high upside and potentially another wide receiver or 2 just to round out the build. So when I look at those 2 positions specifically, I think a guy like Isaac Guerendo is interesting given the injury history that Chris McCaffrey had last year. Tyler Algier is also interesting. You get that correlation with Michael Penix, a high-end handcuff to a guy like Bijan if he were to miss time. Obviously, Algier would be the next guy up in touches. You could go Kyle Williams or QJ or Cedric Tillman. There's a lot of options here. Even guys like Tank Bigsby and Jaylen Wright, if you think those guys are going to get touches in their backfields, but this is not my selection. Let's kick it over to Garrett Price, who's going to be making our pick here in the 13th round.
With our 13th pick, we are going with Jaylen Wright. I wanted to go after a running back here because we're a little thin at running back at the moment, but we also need somebody with some upside. Jaylen Wright has upside for 2 reasons. One, we could see them go to what they did a couple years ago that worked really well with Raheem Mostert and with Devon Achane. But even if that doesn't work, he is an elite handcuff, a guy that if something were to happen to Achane, and we've seen him get banged up in the past, that he would have the opportunity to have a huge workload. And with how that offense runs, he would get a lot of targets and rush attempts. So for me, I'm going with Jaylen Wright.
All right, so there you go. We tack on another running back here in this draft, going with Jaylen Wright of the Miami Dolphins. I think it's a good pick. You have the high upside of this run game here in Miami. Obviously, Devon Achane is probably the guy that you want to own. Definitely the guy that you want to own. But if he were to get injured, Jaylen Wright, Ollie Gordon, these would be the names in the mix. So I definitely don't mind this pick. Going with the week 12 bye here, though, we have Omarion Hampton week 12, Brian Robinson week 12. I don't typically like to look at the bye weeks when we're making draft picks, but because this is an every single week elimination type of exclusive tournament. If we do get to week 12, obviously that's the big if, right? If you get to week 12, right now the only guy we can rely on in the running back room is Tyrone Tracy. So that's something I'm paying attention to. I don't know if these guys are going to be paying attention to that, but definitely like the selection of Jaylen Wright. See the upside here if Devon Achane were to miss time. All right, so it's been a little while since we've worked our way down this board. We're now on the clock here at the 14:08, and we did have some of these running backs come off the board if we wanted to add those to our team. Tank Bigsby, Tyler Algier. I think some of the guys, even Isaac Guerendo that we looked at there in the last round potentially. We did have a little bit of a wide receiver run, and the last couple of those quarterbacks was Stafford, Cam Ward coming off the board as well. So it does seem like at this point in time, the quarterback position is a little bit shallow. It's just Darnold and Aaron Rodgers that are week 1 starters or guaranteed week 1 starters. I guess maybe Russell Wilson in there as well, but we may not expect that to be the whole year. Doesn't really matter anyways. We did get that quarterback position figured out, and then the tight end position has a couple of guys we could take a shot on, but like we said there with Mark Andrews and David Njoku, we're pretty much covered there as well. So I do think for the rest of the way, it should be pretty much running back and wide receiver. When I look at those two positions, guys on the board that I kind of like at this point in time are guys like Josh Palmer, maybe being a deep threat there for the Buffalo Bills, and Josh Allen. I think Demario Douglas is an interesting play just because he can be the slot wide receiver in that New England offense, and you have that correlation with Baltimore there in week 16. If you look at the running back position, maybe a guy like Jerome Ford, Rico Dowdle is a player that I've really liked drafting. I think he's going to be involved this year. Miles Sanders, if you believe he has a chance at getting some touches in that Dallas offense, and Braylon Allen as well, if you think maybe Breece Hall isn't going to be the guy as much as he has been in years past. Also, Jalen McMillan is a player that I really like down here at this range as well. So those are kind of the options that I would be looking at if I was on the clock, but I'm not selecting this pick. Let's take it over to Paul Patterson at Pure Potential, see who he selects here with our 14th round pick.
With our 14th round pick, I'll be selecting Jerome Ford. This team really needed another running back, and the available options weren't terribly inspiring. I was hoping for Tank Bigsby here. He goes right before us in the 14th round. So ultimately I went with Jerome Ford. I think he can help us early in the season with Quinshon Judkins looking increasingly likely to miss some time. I know Dylan Sampson is still there. He might lead the team in carries even from week 1, but Ford's going to have a role as long as Judkins is out. He's going to take some carries, and I think he's going to operate as the primary receiving option. He's going to be in on third downs, the 2-minute drill, might get some early down targets as well. He gives us another active running back to kind of help cover those week 12 buys. And who knows, if Judkins gets put on the exempt list, he could easily miss the entire season, and at that point Ford could be a really useful season-long piece for us in this running back room.
All right, so we go with the running back selection here of Jerome Ford. Obviously you have the incident there with Quinshon Judkins. It's probably going to lead to some early season touches for Jerome Ford, another rookie in that backfield in Dylan Sampson. So maybe early on in the year, I've talked about earlier in this draft where I was a little bit worried of the early season production if Hampton started a little bit slow for our team. Maybe Jerome Ford picks up the slack in the first couple of weeks while we're waiting on Judkins or while Dylan Sampson's getting acclimated to the NFL. I don't mind the pick at all. Should give us an opportunity here to get a couple of points in the lineup early on in the season. Pushing on down this draft board, our last selection there with Ford had Miles Sanders come off the board, Josh Palmer, who I have a little bit of interest in. Like I said, with that last pick, I think he's in a very good offense. That's somebody I could have targeted. A couple other guys like Braylon Allen, maybe, who we would have liked on this team. But other than that, that's really everything that came off the board that I would have been looking at. I think we're just at running back and wide receiver at this point in the draft. Guys right now at those positions that I would probably be interested in. I really like Jalen McMillan. Think he would be a decent pickup for this team. Probably need to add another wide receiver or two to this roster. Also think that Rico Dowdle is a very interesting piece. But looking at the board, maybe Nick Chubb is also interesting with the recent news to Joe Mixon. But it's not my selection here. So let's kick it over to the guys at South Harmon, specifically Adam, and let's see who he selects here with our 15th round pick.
All right, so with our 15th pick here, we're going to be selecting DJ Giddens, running back for the Indianapolis Colts. When I take a look at our team overall right now, I think that the running back position kind of leaves a little bit to be desired overall. And so we're not going to solve the position, so to speak, by drafting anybody in this round here. But I do think there's some running backs on the board that make sense, and that position is kind of one we need to address. And we want DJ Giddens here ultimately because I'm taking a look. It's going to still be Jonathan Taylor as the lead back, primary ball carrier for the Indianapolis Colts. But I think where the Colts drafted DJ Giddens coming out of Kansas State, I think they're going to plan to use him in a complementary style role. I think there's a pretty decent chance that he could get some of the passing down work for this team. And that definitely is going to be a little more fantasy friendly when you take a look at PPR weeks. I think he might have some sneaky finishes just by catching some passes. But if you take a look at last year, Trey Sermon, Yes, Trey Sermon, who's has given us absolutely nothing outside of one top 15 finish. Last year, that came in the 3 weeks where Jonathan Taylor was out. And if Jonathan Taylor was to miss some time, I think DJ Giddens could absolutely hit the ground running with some really great finishes. And even aside from those things, when you take a look last year between Anthony Richardson and Joe Flacco, they kind of had two different styles. Joe Flacco's in there. Obviously, you're going to not want to do much but kind of chuck the ball around, and you saw that. But whether it's Anthony Richardson or Daniel Jones, or they're not even sure who it's going to be, and they're going back and forth between the two, this is going to be a run-heavy scheme, and I think it's going to be a run-friendly offense like it has always been in the past. So DJ Giddens is going to be our selection here in the 15th round.
All right, so reaching down the board a little bit here in ADP, you see the ADP of 199. I think at this point in the draft, the ADP is not so important anymore. It's kind of just get your guy territory, and I don't mind this, adding another running back to this roster that's going to put us at 6 total. I think if it was me drafting, I would probably be done at the running back position. I do feel like this team is lightly light at the running back position, but it's not horrible overall. B-Rob, Tracy, Hampton, all those guys, that's fine. Maybe one more max and we go 7-7 overall at the wide receiver and the running back position. But I do think if this was me, I probably would call this the last running back on the roster. But we'll see what happens. DJ Giddens is the selection, and I don't mind it at all. I think there's an opportunity for him here behind Jonathan Taylor. All right, getting around this longer turn here as we get into that 16th round pick, we did have quite a few names come off the board. I think this is a great range for some dart throw running backs, guys like Rico Dowdle, even guys like Roschon Johnson, Marshawn Lloyd. I like the Jalen McMillan pick here as well. So there's been a lot of really good options that have come off the board as those dart throws. If you wanted to add another running back, as it sits right now, 2-6-5-2 is kind of our build. We have the 6 running backs. I do think it's probably a wide receiver position pick that I would be making at this point in time. We did have that Jalen McMillan pick. Like I said, he would have been by far the best pick in my opinion. It would have been a smash selection for me if that was there. I do like the Diami Brown pick, but we already have Travis Hunter. We could argue maybe you get some correlation with like DeAndre Hopkins if you still believe he has a little bit of juice left in the tank. Guys like Alec Pierce is a big play guy. Iosivas. There's lots of options here. Nobody really sticks out. But it's okay because I don't have to make the selection here. It is going to be Lucas from Fantasy Football Fellas, so let's see who he decides to take with this selection.
With our 16th round pick, I am going to be selecting DeAndre Hopkins. Look, I'm not quite sure what happened in this running back room after Omarion Hampton. I wanted to try and help fix it, but there's really nothing I can solve in the 16th round, unfortunately. Obviously, we get another piece to stack with Lamar Jackson here, but when you also look at the construction of this Ravens wide receiver room, DeAndre Hopkins is really the only ball winner that they have on the outside. Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman, they've combined for only a 35% contested catch rate over the last 2 seasons. Hopkins also gives this team another option inside of the red area. Lamar Jackson, 32 passing touchdowns inside of the red zone last year. Half of them, 16, went to either tight ends, Mark Andrews or Isaiah Likely. I also don't see Rashad Bateman running viciously hot on touchdowns again this year. And Zay Flowers, 5'9", I just don't see him as a viable red zone threat, especially when he only commanded an 11.5% target share inside of the red zone last year. Now, to be clear, I'm certainly not promising you the world of DeAndre Hopkins at 33 years old in the 16th round, but I do think he has a role on this offense. We could get a few spike weeks on touchdowns, and he's the most renowned player on the best team in the range of players available here. With how top heavy the guests before me went on wide receivers for this team as well, we don't need a home run swing to make up points at the position, so I'm just going to make a pick that makes sense within the construction of this team and lock in DeAndre Hopkins.
All right, so he does take DeAndre Hopkins there. He does get some of that correlation, I guess, with Lamar Jackson. We're probably not going to need to rely on DeAndre Hopkins, which isn't a bad thing. I don't know how much DeAndre has left in the tank. I understand the selection. I understand the correlation type of pick there, so I don't mind it by any means. But with Lamb, A.J. Brown, Pickens, Hunter, Higgins on the roster, the hope is that he's probably not a guy that makes the lineup unless it's a week where DeAndre Hopkins finds the end zone. So I understand the correlation. I don't mind the pick. Either way, I think wide receiver was definitely the right choice as far as positions go for that last selection. All right, so we're moving on here for our second to final pick on this team. Right here in the 17th round, we had Alec Pierce come off the board, Diami Brown come off the board, a couple tight ends, Keenan Allen, Brashard Smith. Basically just dart throw options at this point. That's really all it is. If we're looking at the running back position, we have correlation with Keaton Mitchell, Justice Hill. I do think Jarquez Hunter is an interesting player. Taj Brooks is an interesting player as well. I like both of those guys as potential dart throws down here. You see I've drafted a decent amount of them. When I'm looking at the wide receiver position, guys like Jaylen Noel are interesting. I think Darius Slayton is interesting as well. If we wanted correlated picks, maybe Andrei Iosivas for that week 15 against Baltimore and Lamar Jackson, Tutu Atwell against Atlanta, even Dontavion Wicks or Adonai Mitchell, Jalen Coker. I think there's a good couple of options here. at the wide receiver and the running back position. So this isn't going to be my selection. I will make the final selection on this team, but this is the last pick that somebody else will make. So let's kick it over to Caleb Nemi with 4 for 4 fantasy football.
With the 17th pick in this draft, I select Woody Marks for our team. When you look at what this expert team drafted has done, pretty good at quarterback, pretty good at wide receiver, pretty good depth at tight end, but running back, pretty lackluster when you consider the fact that we had Hampton, that you have Brian Robinson, Tyrone, Tracy. So I was like, we got to take a shot here and kind of have a little bit of upside. And Woody Marks, to me, was kind of the best player available to do that. Now, there was a guy like a Justice Hill, which you could maybe make the argument that he had upside with the Baltimore Ravens. But the reason I chose Woody Marks is because during this slow draft, news broke that Joe Mixon is dealing with a little bit of an injury. And so all of a sudden we're looking at a backfield potentially to start the season of Nick Chubb and Woody Marks. Now, Nick Chubb has been Mr. Consistent for the Cleveland Browns, but we've seen massive injury this last year. How is he going to recover? I know there's been some good training camp footage of Nick Chubb, but Woody Marks was somebody that getting drafted out of USC in round 4 makes me a little bit of excited because he's 5'10", 207, 4.6 40-yard dash, so he's not the fastest player out there, but to me, he has a ton of pass catching ability. And so if we wanted to be taking a shot on this 17th round, we got one more round to go. I wanted to take a shot, at least bolster this running back depth. If there's a shot that Woody Marks can turn into anything, produce RB2, even high-end RB3 points per game for us. Absolutely love this pick for kind of bolstering that depth on our team, as we do feel really good about our wide receivers, our quarterbacks, our tight ends. But this running back position is kind of in flux. And to be honest, in an underdog tournament, we can have our running backs be in flux. So I'll be taking Woody Marks to healthily help cement that. Thanks, Andrew, for letting me participate in this draft again this year. Hopefully this team wins us a ton of money.
Okay, so he decides to add another running back to this team that's going to make it 7 running backs on the roster, putting us at a 2-7-6-2 build, with probably the final pick here for me going to be a wide receiver. I think the Woody Mark picks is fine when you look at what has happened with Joe Mixon this offseason, showing up to camp in a boot, not being able to practice here during training camp. It makes sense. It's an upside shot. I don't mind it. Like I said, at this point in the draft, it is all just upside shots. So definitely a decent selection, and we will happily put him here on the roster. All right, and so we are on the clock here with our final selection here in this draft. This is going to be my pick, like I said earlier. With the current build being 2-7-6-2, I am going wide receiver. As you can see here in the queue, the guys that I kind of had in mind for a potential pick were Andrei Iosivas for the Cincinnati Bengals, Dontavion Wicks for the Green Bay Packers, and Adonai Mitchell. We do have that Baltimore Ravens correlation with both Iosivas and Dontavion Wicks, but ultimately I am going to be deciding to draft Andrei Iosivas here. I do think he is the better selection. Obviously, that Cincinnati Bengals offense is likely going to be in a lot of games similar to last year where they're throwing the football a ton. T. Higgins hasn't had the cleanest bill of health throughout the entirety of his career, and or if Jamar Chase has an injury, we are going to have a big chance here where Iosivas has to step up and get a lot of the receiving work. So you have Jermaine Burton, who's been reportedly having a good camp, but Iosivas is the pick for me, the guy to round out this team. And when I'm looking at the overall roster, the quarterback position is fine. Lamar Jackson and Michael Penix. Obviously, we're relying on Lamar Jackson to give us a similar year as last year. The running back room is definitely the weakest part of this team. Omarion Hampton, Brian Robinson Jr., Tyrone Tracy, Jaylen Wright, Jerome Ford, DJ Giddens, and Woody Marks are the selections. I think Omarion Hampton has top 12 potential if he gets the majority of the workload. That could take a little bit of time for him to get acclimated to the NFL. B-Rob, Tracy, those are the only other guys that have kind of starting opportunity right away as the season starts. Maybe Jerome Ford included in there, and then some upside shots. Hopefully it's enough to where we're not going to be getting eliminated early on in this tournament, but the wide receiver position is very strong. Lamb, AJ Brown, George Pickens, Travis Hunter, Jayden Higgins, DeAndre Hopkins, and Andrei Iosivas. And then our tight end room is very strong as well, with the correlation of Mark Andrews and then David Njoku as the tight end too. So not a bad team. Definitely the running back position isn't as good as I wanted it to be, but we'll see how it does in this tournament against all of these other people. So there you have it, folks. That is 15 experts drafting my fantasy football team. I did this last year. It was a very fun video to do. I figured we would do it again this year. If you've made it to this point in the video, please do me the favor. This video is very hard to make. It's basically 2.5-ish weeks of nonstop filming, basically trying to get those picks when you're on the clock, coordinate with these guys to get the videos in, all of that good stuff. So it takes a lot of time. There's a lot that goes into it. So if you've made it to this this point, do me the favor and just hit the like button for me. It is the best free way to show this channel some support. Also, make sure you hit that subscribe button. That way you don't miss any future content on this channel in the future. We are trying to help you guys win your fantasy football championships here in 2025, and go join our free Discord. Thank you again to everybody who joined and helped me with this video, but nothing else for you guys today. I will see you on our next episode. Until then, peace out.